Hello and welcome back to the World Football Show. This is the first episode of the new season and we're raring to go. I'm Mina Rzouki and I'll be your host for tonight. And we'll be joined by Raph Honigstein and of course Andy Brassell. Guys, let's start off with my favorite league and of course the story that keeps on going, whether it's Berber or whether it's Bentner, who's going to be Juventus's new striker?
Well, it looks like Bentner. And
Don't say that to me.
It's a little underwhelming given
given the names that were associated.
Absolutely, we've gone down from Van Persie, Llorente.
It was Higuain at one stage. It was now it's Bentner.
It seems that Berbatov has just been racking up on his frequent flyer miles at everyone else's expense, despite knowing that his wife didn't want to leave England in the first place. I'd love to see him play regularly somewhere, but it's an unusual approach because, of course, Bentner and Berbatov both have their merits, but they're two very, very different types of strikers. So what are Juventus really looking for?
It doesn't exactly smack of a sort of long-term strategy to find out that Berbatov is on his way to Fiorentina and then get his phone number, call him up while he's at the departure lounge and hello, Berbatov, yes? Okay, I come. I mean, and then of course he didn't because he goes back to London. I mean, it's well, really
this is
strange.
the thing. I mean, at the time, Fiorentina have obviously come out with this really harsh statement to be like, you know, we really disapprove of the way that Juventus has handled the situation, and of course their anger goes back to the days when Baggio was taken away from them.
But they did get their own back by selling them Felipe Melo for 22 million or whatever it was.
For
wonderful player.
A ridiculous. Can I just say something?
Yeah.
That last year he wasn't that bad. You know, not the last year. His last year at Juventus wasn't that bad, to be very honest. In fact, I would go so far as to say he was possibly our best midfielder.
Well, and he's got the number 10 shirt at Galatasaray, so
There we
there's
go.
no arguing with that, is there?
No, but to be honest, with Berbatov, do you really think he would have worked at Juve? I mean, he's a little bit slow considering their style of play. I think with the 3-5-2 formation, he wouldn't have worked very well. Probably not the right player.
Well, it's hard to say, of course, because he started 5 Premier League games last season, so I think it's a big risk for whoever signs him. But you know, Juventus.
You think Bentner's better?
Well, Juventus needs someone to attack the Champions League, and they need someone who's a discernible improvement on what they've got already, because this is a step up they're trying to take.
But I'm not being funny. I think Bentner might actually be a better fit. Because whenever I saw Bentner play for Arsenal, and sometimes he was playing a 4-3-3 in a wide left position, he did actually do a decent job. You know, he's not work shy, and he can also be a focal point up front. Something that Juventus definitely have been lacking.
Definitely. And I do think that he works well with Denmark as well, and that could be something. But speaking of Juventus and obviously their situation, forgetting that striker at the moment, what about the lack of Antonio Conte for 10 months? Obviously because he has been accused of knowing of a possible fix in a game, of 2 games actually. He was cleared of
convicted.
one. Okay.
Sorry, Mina.
Fine. He was convicted of one of them so far. He was cleared of the other, and now it's a 10-month ban. So do you think that's going to affect them too much?
It's definitely not an advantage not having a coach on the side. And at the same time, no one's stopping him taking the training sessions. No one, I suspect, will stop him making the decisions during the game, you know, through intermediates, whatever. So I don't think it's really that much of an issue. It's not great when your coach is not there.
Really, especially when you think that there are certain games that Juventus did really badly in last season, and then it came to the halftime interval, like the one against Napoli and against Milan. And then when it was the halftime interval, you saw them sort of change everything and come out raring to go in the second half.
But don't you think there's a certain plan there? There's a certain collectivity that was their strength last season, really, and they had an adaptableness tactically within the squad, and that adaptability. That's something that you could talk about being through all sort of strata of like both the coaching and the playing staff, really. So you know, it showed that they could cope with a lot of situations. Last season they probably drew a few too many games. That's where the striker comes in. But they dealt with a lot of situations, and you know, there was a point probably in early spring, where it looked like they were going to lose out on the title to Milan, and you could see Milan squeezing on them. They really came back. So I think there's a lot of grit and determination in the squad as well.
Yeah, there's a real sense of belief. But now we've got our Italian football correspondent with us, joining us from Monaco, Tancredi Palmieri. How are you? Ciao.
Buongiorno, guys. I'm probably better than you in that warm, hot studio.
Oh, wow. You look fabulous in your suit over there. So tell me,
Thank you very much.
do you think that anyone at the moment can really challenge Juventus? Or do you think the fact that they're missing Antonio Conte will prove quite disastrous for them this season?
I think that if there wouldn't be the Antonio Conte ban, there wouldn't be any chance for anybody to challenge Juventus. But I think at the same time that the Champions League, as the Antonio Conte ban, will be a major issue for Juventus, because it's true that they did quite good signings in midfield and in defense to have at least some 2 or 3 valuable replacements in both the parts of the team. The problem is that 50% of the potential of that let Juventus play at such a level is coming from Andrea Pirlo. And there is no replacement for Andrea Pirlo, not because the management didn't find it, but because it's really hard to find. Or you have the money to find Luka Modric, for example, or otherwise you struggle. And when we get December, January, and Andrea Pirlo will be on his muscles with the charge of the Champions League campaign, of the Euro 2012 campaign, it will be hard. I think that this is like filling the gap between Juventus and, if I have to say 2 names, Inter and Napoli more than anybody else.
Well, do you think the fact that they got Asamoah will help with that?
Pardon, say again, do you think the fact that?
They have Asamoah now that they've brought in to sort of help out with that. Don't you think he will make the difference in midfield if Pirlo can't?
Kwadwo Asamoah, you mean? Yes, of course. Kwadwo Asamoah is a fantastic signing. Already Juventus played 2 official games, and in both cases he has been the man of the match for Juventus. But that is not Andrea Pirlo. There is nobody like Andrea Pirlo in Serie A, and there are probably around the world something like maybe 4 or 5 players like that. And still, the clockwork prepared by Antonio Conte can go on if Andrea Pirlo, the art of the mechanism, makes that go on. It doesn't mean that without Andrea Pirlo, Juventus is nothing. It doesn't mean that without Andrea Pirlo, Antonio Conte is not a good manager. But I mean, the quality that Juventus expressed last year, and they're still able to express, it's so much depending from Pirlo. And they could do less if they would have an alternative play with kind of same quality, for example, up in front. But the so-called in Italy top player, the big star, the number 9, didn't arrive, so they don't have an alternative.
Speaking of world-class talents, now Milan has lost, of course, their star striker and their star centre-back. Do you think they can even pose a challenge for the Scudetto this season? And they had a terrible start in their first game. They seemed to be completely outrun in midfield. There was no transition between defence and attack. So what's going on? And do you think Montolivo really has the character to step up? And is not Torino suffering without having great midfielders alongside him?
Yeah, the transition is the best point. That's always been the main problem for Milan, that was solved by Seedorf and by Rui Costa in the big years, in the golden age. Then there was also, I would say, Kaká that was connecting. Boateng is doing now that. Now, Boateng is there. The problem is that transition between whom? If you have sold if you have sold Ibrahimovic. That doesn't mean that Milan just for rubbish, AC Milan. But that is one moment in which, if you have a good average, like Milan got, good average, not top quality, good average, then is the work of the manager that has to come out. And that is the problem, because Allegri have lived on the shoulders of Ibrahimovic for 2 years, and now that so poor, honestly, forecast from Allegri, now it's coming up. I mean, you could spot the defense, the midfield especially, of Milan, that didn't know what to do with the ball. We should remember that Allegri is the person that decided at a certain moment, sorry, just to mention Allegri, that decided at a certain moment that for this kind of playing was better Van Bommel than Andrea Pirlo in the center of the midfield. That is telling everything. So at this point, you were talking about Montolivo. I think that Montolivo can step up, but we can't give the cross just to Montolivo. He can be one of the 3 guys on the hill helping Jesus to lift the cross, but can be Jesus on the cross. Montolivo is not Pirlo. It will never be Pirlo, but it's not even the same role of
Well, you see,
Pirlo.
this is the thing. I don't think that Montalivo really belongs in that deep-lying midfielder role. I would like to see him closer up front and perhaps where Boateng plays. But what about Inter? Have they not been... what about with you guys? Have you watched Inter play recently?
Yeah, I saw the first game of the season. And...
Stramaccioni has got them quite...
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good because they seem to have a plan. And that's what Milan don't seem to have. They really seem to be stumbling on, looking for a few cheapies where they can. Whereas, you know, you sense that Stramaccioni's got a bit of license to implement his ideas. They've seen what he's done at the end of last season. And, you know, he seems to be able to liberate the better players in the team to express themselves as well.
Yeah, and there's probably a chance that Coutinho could really develop under him. Tancredi, do you think that Inter will pose a great challenge for Juve for the title, considering how well they're doing under a coach that I thought was always going to be brilliant?
Well, I thought they would pose an higher challenge until 24 hours ago. Now that they signed out Julio Cesar and Maicon, I think they will pose a challenge, but it's not the same kind of. I've been listening a lot of people saying, oh, Maicon is not the same of 2010. Oh, you probably remember that kind of performance. Well, I'm watching all the Inter games as Milan and Juventus, and most of the biggest part of the Italian clubs, but I'm watching all the Inter games, big part of them alive. The importance of Maicon, even when he's not playing that good, the importance, the way he was helping Inter to cover all the pitch, to stretch the game, to be the guy to download the ball when midfield is in trouble. That is the biggest part of the time until last year in Inter. It's just something that is extremely hardly placed. Not mentioning his power of shooting, his power of assisting, his power of passing. Without Maicon and without Julio Cesar, because Andanovic is still all to prove that he could match this kind of performance of Julio Cesar, I think that Inter is losing a lot.
Okay.
They did that because of the wages, but in my opinion, it's such a pity because they did very good signings.
I still think Stramaccioni can do something special with this squad, but that's all we have time for. Thank you for joining us, Tancredi.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to the Champions League, though. Let me go.
Let's pray for a good draw for the Italian teams. Speak to you later.
Thank you. The few ones.
The few ones that are left. Of course, Udinese lost in their Champions League bid. Do you think that, and it was that whole thing with Guidolin wanting to leave because he doesn't think that he's good enough to guide them anymore. What do you think about them? Do you think they can even pose a challenge? I mean, they keep getting rid of all their best players, and then, you know, they bring in all these guys that sometimes it works out for them, or has worked out for them in the past, but I'm not entirely sure how they're going to manage without Isla.
Well, Guidolin just looked absolutely broken at the end of that Braga game. It was so sad. He looked broken from about 60 minutes in fact. And, you know, you think Braga, I mean, it's different with them. They don't have top class players, but they have players who can handle an occasion like that. And I think that really showed. And, you know, Di Natale looked really alone and frustrated. But I think there's a sense of despondency that there wasn't last year as well. And you think last year they got rid of 3 big players before last year, so you think, why can't they do it again? Especially as those were 3 bigger players in Alexis Sanchez, Isla, Gökhan Inler and Zapata. But you think it's the fact that there's some sort of unrest there because the Pozzos have gone and bought Watford. And it's like the fans there are thinking, well, they've got Watford, they've got Granada as well. Are they really that interested? You know, our club should be the priority.
Well, their club should be the priority, and I think that Guidolin is really heartbroken now, so it's up to Pozzo to make amends. But he's managed to keep hold of him for another year. Join us after the break, and we'll be tackling another European league. So I'll see you in 5. Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Mina Rzouki and I'm still joined by Raph Honigstein and Andy Brassell. Now on to Spain, and the biggest story there is of course the Supercopa between Real Madrid and Barcelona. Really briefly, guys, do you think that Madrid deserved it?
Well, on the balance of the first half, maybe the first half of the first half, they definitely deserved the win. They could have been out of sight, you know, by by the halftime whistle, they played with tremendous penetration and created all sorts of chances. And they made for once, I think, Mascherano look like a midfielder who's playing in the wrong position, which hasn't really happened very often, since he's moved back there. But here, his inexperience, or perhaps his ability to deal with a sort of slightly more mundane tasks of sort of big clearances down the middle, where sort of big centre backs would just head them away, he struggled.
It's all these balls over the top. Hello, we welcome Tim Stannard from La Liga Loca. How are you, Tim?
Very well, thank you very much.
So speaking of, bad defences, now we know that, Messi is, of course, the star player for Barcelona, but do you think they're quite dependent on Puyol and what he can bring to the side, considering it seems like Piqué doesn't do as well without him and they're susceptible to that overhead ball? How much does Puyol really bring to the back line?
He brings an enormous amount. He just brings that old-fashioned notion that if you put a long ball in over the top, he's not going to try and control it. I'm not sure what Mascherano or Piqué were trying to do. He would just blast it into the top corner. He's also got into the top of the stands, rather. He's also got that pace as well that can get him out of trouble, that can catch up with forwards, which neither Mascherano or Piqué do. The question earlier as to whether Madrid deserved it, I don't think they did. I think it was Barca that lost the Super Cup rather than Real Madrid winning it. I think because of all those errors, Victor Valdez put them back in the tie for the second leg, those two defensive mistakes. And even when Madrid were 11 against 10 in the second half, they couldn't close off the game. And it was Messi who was just inches away from actually sealing it for Barcelona with that very, very late shot. So a very relieved Real Madrid. Not that you'd know that in the Spanish capital, where it's jubilation and they're feeling that it is Barcelona's end of a cycle again.
So, speaking of Real Madrid at the moment, I understand that a lot of fans at the time at Getafe were complaining that he's not really, he's too pragmatic, he's a little bit defensive-minded, he's not the right coach to perhaps lead them again. Is there sort of rumblings of the fact that people really do want him to leave, or is there still a strong support for the coach who now wants to call himself the only one?
There's absolutely no backing for him to leave. I think it was just a one-off. I was at the Getafe game, and rather than it actually being too defensive, Real Madrid lost the plot completely. Well, Mourinho did a little bit, and it was overly attacking. They had six forwards at once. Xabi Alonso stuck in midfield on his own, and a back three. And this is why Getafe, if you see the second goal, was easy for them. So you could say Mourinho lost his kind of DNA and went a bit crazy, and that's what lost him the game. And afterwards, he wasn't very happy, and he was less happy even more on Tuesday. I think he'd been ruminating on what went on, and he gave a very ominous warning to his players about Wednesday's match, saying he wants less interest in the result of the Super Cuppa, but the performance, to find out if there's a psychological problem in his team or individuals in his team, which I think was very telling indeed. And from the first half anyway, it seems that there isn't.
Yeah, well, there are certainly no psychological problems. But do you think that they're good enough to sort of win it again, or do you think Barcelona are proving to be another force under Villanova?
After a week and a half, I have no idea.
Come on, give us a quick one.
Of course they can win it again, and of course Barcelona can win it again. Again, it's going to be those two, everyone else 45, 50 points behind, and over 9-10 months of grueling matches, who loses the least amount of points. Barcelona could easily drop points against Valencia at Camp Nou this weekend. Real Madrid should pick up 3 points against Granada at the weekend. Back to 2 points, back to square one, you could say. So it's a marathon, not a sprint, but of course they can do it.
Okay, and I want to speak about Atletico Bilbao for a second. Athletic Bilbao. Tell me, Andy, what do you think? They've conceded 9 goals. We've spoke about it a little before. Do you think the fact that they don't have a striker at the moment is proving quite tough, with Munain out, Llorente not playing?
Well, it's more a case of morale, isn't it, really? If you think of the fan protests against Llorente and Javi Martinez, who's obviously gone now, the fact that Bielsa had this row with the board and some builders before the start of the season, yes. And there was such a together group at the end of last season. But I think that can I'd be interested to hear what Tim's got to say about this. I think that can kind of obscure the fact that at the start of Bielsa coming, that the players didn't take to him straight away, and they really quite struggled at first.
But what do you think, Tim?
I think, Andy, you got it completely right there. I was at the Vicente Calderon on Monday, and it was really depressing, and not for normal reasons about watching Atletico Madrid, but because of the shadow Athletic Bilbao was of what they were last season. Their game is all about pressing, energy, enthusiasm, passion, which we saw in those games against Manchester United, for example. They did nothing on Monday. They didn't challenge. They didn't really seem to care. Bielsa did his normal thing of like wandering around the technical area, crouching, squatting, and I think the players find him very hard going anyway. And you can see why he's not very communicative in the post-match press conferences. If you ask him a question, he doesn't look at you. He stares at the ground and mumbles for about 10 minutes on some answers. He doesn't really build any bonds with anyone really, and that's fine if his tactics work. But when it comes to the time where the players have lost motivation, maybe lost a little bit of willpower and confidence in themselves, Bielsa is not really the manager you need to get them out of that situation. They've lost their first 2 games, conceded 9. If they lose any more, then he will be going.
Sorry, Tim, for me, their tactics are really exhaustive, and you have to have sort of optimal levels of fitness. You have to be concentrated for 90 minutes, and you have to really go ahead with the game plan, execute it to perfection. So if there is a slight sort of, feeling of, unrest or anything like that, the whole scheme won't work, and then they just sort of fall over triumphantly, sort of 9, they concede 9 and whatever. Is there any way that he would change to try to get this back on top, or is this just a case of it's going to keep falling and falling for Bilbao? Because I'm not sure how he can correct this at the moment. It seems the players have sort of jumped off the ship.
Yeah, to borrow a football cliche, you need to give 120% if you're an Athletic Bilbao player. And of course, Javi Martinez is gone. They could survive without him. What they couldn't do, though, is survive without Fernando Llorente. With those 2 players gone, if Llorente goes on Friday, then they'll have 60 million euros in the bank, but it's absolutely useless. Of course, Athletic Bilbao can't just replace their players. They're going to be stuck. They're going to be stuck with Aritz Adoritz, who's an aging striker, and Toquera, who's willing and is not really a goal getter. He's good for about 2 or 3 a season. So on a practical nature, they're simply not going to be the force they were last season. There's nothing they can do about that. And again, the players, I think, are very, very, very fed up with Bielsa and his, I'm going to say, peculiar ways. Okay, and one last question for Malaga. Despite every financial problem possible that they're suffering at the moment and the loss of, big names like Santi Cazorla, they're still doing well. Do you think that there's a chance that they'll actually keep going at this rate? Is Pellegrini good enough to keep the ship steady? No, I think Manuel Pellegrini said after the Panathinaikos game that he expected 6 new signings to come in over the summer, 4 new signings rather. He lost 6 players instead, so in theory he says he needs 10 players. They've not brought in anyone yet. They're looking at bringing in Roque Santa Cruz and Javier Saviola, so they're going very 2006, you could say. It's not going to be enough to keep them in the top 6 in the league, and it's not going to be enough to do a decent Champions League campaign. It's a real shame, but they've not invested, and they really, really had to do that over the summer if they were going to make their mark both in Spain and Europe. They haven't done it, and they're going to suffer for it. All right, well, thank you so much, Tim. We're going to let you go now because we know you have to rush off. But we will see you next week, and we'll chat some more about, of course, Barcelona and Real Madrid. See you then. A pleasure. Do you think so with Malaga, or do you think that that's it? Because, I think that, against Panathinaikos, they were also facing a squad that, has their own financial problems, have also been forced to take a pay cut, and that's probably why they excelled. But
the problem is, I think, that it hurts that kind of team just a little bit more because the players, or some of the players, were signed under very different circumstances. Now they find themselves in a team that's all of a sudden cutting back. There's been all sorts of stories about players not being paid on time. I think morale is pretty low. Of course, you want to get into the Champions League. I think that sort of moment in the season managed to get everyone together. But over the long, hard season, especially if you're in midfield, not really playing for anything, I think they're going to really struggle. What about Manuel Pellegrini? Why do you think he's decided to stay?
Well, I think he's had certain rather vague assurances, one of which has not been a pay cut. And that's quite important because, he's a very, very well-paid manager in La Liga terms. But I think it's all about the money, basically. Yeah, but I think there's a bit of professional pride after what happened to him at Real Madrid as well. And, I think there is a certain degree of spirit there. And, people think about Malaga and they think about the money. But what was something that was so positive for them at the start is also they recognised the fact that Malaga is about local players. And so they brought back Isco from Valencia for 6 million. He was born a couple miles down the road from the stadium. He was absolutely fantastic in the Champions League qualifiers, and it looks like they're not going to get rid of him. You've had this young guy, the 16-year-old Fabrice Olinga, who's become
Cameroonian.
That's right. He's from Eto's academy, and he's become the youngest scorer in La Liga. I think 16 years and 98 days or something like that. And when he led the line against Panathinaikos, of course, he'll be up and down over the season, but he looked pretty good. Now, if as Tim was saying, they can get in someone, say like Roque Santa Cruz, who's someone a bit more experienced, who's played in La Liga, who can take the pressure off him, so he doesn't have to play all the time. Maybe that'll help.
Raph seems to be.
Roque Santa Cruz. He's in a lot of leagues, but he usually doesn't play in them because he's always injured.
So not the right move for them.
I don't know. I think it's.
Do you think they'll make it Europa League spot? Or a Champions League spot?
Well, no one's got any money, so they're all in the same boat to a certain extent. You've got to say it's really open. The fourth Champions League spot's got to be open for Atletico. You know, they've got to be going for that, particularly if they hang on to Falcao. But the rest of them are all swimming around in the trough, really.
Can they hold on to Falcao? Because in my opinion, he's probably the best number 9 out there.
Well, it will take a big offer to shift him. It will take a really big offer to shift him. And as Tim was saying, at that game at the Calderon against Athletic, he was fantastic again. Yeah. But, you know, he's got to do his thing in the Europa League. That's what he does. So, yeah, he should stay at Atletico.
God, I don't really know, because you know what? He would have been my ideal player to have at Juventus if we could have one number 9 when you love Falcao. What about Rayo?
Super Nicky instead.
Yeah, don't be greedy.
Rayo Vallecano. Now, they're doing really well at the start. No one imagined that would even be possible. And they lost Michu, of course, and they're still firing from all cylinders. That's not going to last, is it?
I don't think it will. But
or is it like a Levante story?
Yeah.
Well,
Levante were top near January, weren't they? And
yeah, they started off really well and then sort of, you know...
And finished up in Europa League still, which I think shows there's that degree of openness. But, you know, I think you're expecting... on the first day of the season when they're playing Granada in what was the same as the last game of last season, you're expecting them to get a bit of a kicking. But you know, they survived it really well. The fact that they haven't got Michu, they've moved on from that. They've got a couple of interesting players in, like Chori Dominguez, for example. So you know that team that started the season and beat Granada against all the odds, because Granada has spent a few Euros, which a lot of teams haven't been able to.
They've brought in something like a ridiculous amount of players, Granada.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and they've not all been loans from Udinese, which is quite interesting.
But their coach I find fascinating. Well, a lot of them still are loans, you know, but their coach I find fascinating. He's got no top level experience.
No, but I think it's a good idea for them. You know, he's done a decent job at Alcorcon. They're an ambitious project. They're trying to grow, and he's going in the same direction where they went for someone before in Fabri who's quite reliable, but decided that wasn't going to really work for them. And the same with Abel as well. So, you know, they're going out on a limb. They've invested a bit more in players, bringing in Al Arabi, for example. That thing that they were lacking last season, talking about Malaga there before, it's similar for Granada on a smaller scale. They were lacking a proper striker. And he's someone who can score goals. So they're obviously thinking as well, there's that opportunity to step up a level because no one's really investing. And I think they only need to look down the road to Malaga, to Sevilla, who have sort of plateaued after their years of glory. So there is an opportunity there.
Yeah, first coach also to be handed a 2-year contract in Granada.
They'll regret that.
But do join us after the break where we'll be taking on another league, of course, and this time it should be Raf's favourite one. So see you in a few. Hello and welcome back to the show. Now we move over to Germany, and the Bundesliga just started, and of course a lot of results that many of us expected. Starting off, of course, with Bayern Munich, who run-of-the-mill sort of easy victory over a newly promoted. Tell me the name again.
Greuther Fürth.
Run
of the mill, yes, but not that easy because they made it difficult for them. It took them a long time to break them down just before half time, and it was a typical performance that we've seen from them, in the second Bundesliga when they went up, but also that we often see from newly promoted sides early on in the season. You know, they're full of energy, they have the belief. And they made it very, very tough for Bayern.
They were quite compact, they were nicely organised and everything, but it seemed to be that I think that they were suffering at the doing anything more than just trying to stifle them from establishing a passing rhythm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You just, without having been in the change room before the game, you just know what kind of speech the coach gave. And Mike Buskin said, keep it tight, try to nick one on the break. That's great, as long as it's 0-0. And then you concede, and then it's like, what do we do now? And of course, then they pick them off. So.
Is there a chance that they can stay, or do you think they'll get relegated?
I think they can stay up. I mean, they haven't got the big names, and they lost one or two players, of course, as you'd expect. Auxion, for example, left to Frankfurt, and these kind of guys. But I think the togetherness will be there. I think, the whole town, it's effectively two towns come together, will be really behind them. And I wouldn't be overly surprised if they stay up. I mean, Augsburg managed to stay up, and if they can do it, and I think third player can follow a similar blueprint on the pitch, the way they play, then why shouldn't they?
Why shouldn't they, indeed? What about Borussia Dortmund? And of course, is there a chance that they could win the hat-trick of league titles?
There's a chance. I mean, they kept everyone, bar Shinji Kagawa. They brought in Marco Reus. So, on paper, they've improved. They have a better squad. Okay, Barrios is gone, so perhaps there's a reliance on Lewandowski now. He really needs to stay fit, because in Julian Schieber they've got a guy who's more like a sort of Swabian version of Sturridge. He likes to play wide and is not as prolific. And there isn't really that like-for-like replacement. Then again, not many centre forwards can play like Lewandowski anyway. That's why he was in such.
Do you not think that there'll be too much pressure on him? Sort of, last season why he did so well is sort of everyone thought it would be Barrios. Then he had to come in and he was like, "Oh, this is my time. I need to shine." But then, of course, now this is really on him, and now it's a pressure rather than him trying to prove himself.
I think maybe in the Champions League you'll see that, but in the Bundesliga nothing will change for them. I mean, they're lucky in the sense that they are in a town where the whole town supports them. The newspapers support them. All the writers are fans themselves, and Bayern slightly enviously always talk about Gundogan. He's had a very, very poor first half when he went there last year from Bremen, and people thought
spectacular towards
people thought he's going to be the from Nuremberg, and people thought he's going to be the new big thing, and of course it took him 6, 7, 8 months to actually come through. At the same time, no one was writing about him. No one was saying, look at this flop, he's terrible, because that's not how Dortmund as a football city work. They give people the time. Same, I mean, Lewandowski, even the beginning of last season, so 12 months ago, was the understudy of Barrios, was someone who wasted a lot of chances. And I remember seeing them in the Champions League here when they played Arsenal. I think it was the second game of the competition, or third. And for with this guy up front, they'll never make it because he's just not good enough. And you see the improvement that has come.
You know what? Borussia Dortmund now are on 4th pot for the Champions League draw, so they are. They could be in a group of death.
That's a heck of a 4th seed.
Honestly, can you imagine?
Isn't it? The question I really wanted to ask you is really about the combo between Götze and Reus, because Reus coming in means that they don't really have to rush Götze back. They've taken it very gently with him, but Klopp is just making us beg for more, isn't he? Because every time they're together for 20 minutes, it's amazing.
Like dynamite explosive.
It's wonderful to have Götze come off the bench for the last 20 minutes when your position a little bit knackered, and this guy comes on and just picks up the ball and starts running at people. It's wonderful, and of course you can push him out wide left. That's where he played a lot of games, or you can push out Reus to the wing, or do what and this is interesting. Do what Löw has been talking about, that he actually sees Reus as a striker, and perhaps take Lewandowski off and go a little bit more defensive. And you play almost with no regular centre forward. So
we're doing
in a 4-6-0 or whatever you want to call it.
Copying Spain.
Copying Spain or Roma, or United of 2008. So it leaves off a lot of interesting possibilities for them.
But do you think that the fact that they do rely a lot on youthful talent, like Götze and like Reus, and I thought that they suffered a little under Werder, against Werder, right? They needed sort of Götze to come on and start doing, special magic to win them that. So it was like about them digging deep. But what are they going to do when it comes to Champions League? They don't really have the experience necessary, perhaps, to go all the way.
Well, I think when Sven Bender is there, it makes a huge difference. He next to Kehl has got the grey hairs, you'd say, in sort of business contact. He's the veteran. He's done it, been there, done it. And Sven Bender is just sort of the kilometre machine. He just runs and runs and runs and closes all the space. The two of them are a really powerful combination. And Kiel last season, perhaps, still coming back from injury, wasn't quite at his best. Certainly not in the Champions League. He improved a lot when they went out. But I think overall they'll have a bit more know-how, a little bit more street smartness about them this time around. And also I think they'll concentrate a little bit more. Because up until now, it was like, Bundesliga, we want to get back in the Champions League. If we can get out of the group stage of Champions League, that's great, but it's sort of not really, it wasn't really a top priority. They were happy in a sense just to be there after all these years missing out and nearly going bankrupt. I think this time it will be different. If you want to talk about pressure, the pressure is not so much a thing about them defending the title. The pressure is, can they actually do themselves justice in Europe? Because sort of the whole league wants them to do it, because every time they don't, it puts a huge question mark against the whole Bundesliga.
The question is, can Bayern do it this time around?
Well, they got fairly close in Europe. You mean?
Yes. Are you still reeling?
They are, I'm sure. I think the fact that they paid 40 million euros to sign Javi Martin as a player who they themselves say were probably overpaid by about 10.
Is that necessary?
I guess they think it is. I think it sends a lot of really useful signals to the squad itself. To sort of the wider world, to their own ego. I think it's a bit of a...
Is it just to prove that they have the money, they can buy what they want, and they're still top dogs when it comes to the Bundesliga?
It's like when you have a bad day, you go to Bond Street.
Is that me specific?
I think. And
personally, Sloane Street is far quicker for me to access.
I think that's what happened here, and that's why they even pushed all the way, because initially they thought, okay, we'll give them 25, I'm sure we'll get them. Then they thought, okay, we give them 30, maybe 33, and a few add-ons, and we get them. And when Bilbao said no, they thought, okay, this is the sort of poker game, where we can only win. The other side will only fold if we go all in. That was the only move they had. So they said, okay, you don't want to negotiate. You don't want to negotiate with us. We'll trigger the clause. Well, worth it. I mean, one Javi Martinez at 23, 5, 6, 7 good years might be worth more than another 2 or 3 20 million euro signings like Luis Gustavo, who they signed in January 11. So, on paper, midfield with Ribery, Robben, Schweinsteiger, Martinez, and then maybe Kroos in front of them. It looks pretty
fantastic.
Good. Looks pretty good.
Well, I certainly hope that they won't be put in the same category as any top Italian teams. But on the other side, relegation battlers, I know it's very early to say this, but do you think it could be Hamburg or SV?
Yeah, I mean, it started terribly. And usually after
usually
after the first game of the season, you think, come on, this is early days. Let's not talk about these things. But because the last season ended so poorly, because they got knocked out in the cup already,
and they have a sporting director who seems to be so willing to throw in the towel already.
Well, I don't think he wants to throw in the towel, Frank Arnesen, but he's been getting now the stick that throughout last season people were reserving judgment, and now that he's almost had a second very poor off-season, they're beginning to ask serious questions. And of course the biggest joke of all in a negative sense is that after signing all these Chelsea reserves players, he's actually missed out on the one who seems to be really decent, which is Kevin De Bruyne, who's playing absolutely wonderfully for Werder Bremen already. So, and there are indications that the Van der Vaart deal that they're still trying to get, and Jiracek, who they have signed from Wolfsburg, which is a useful addition, was actually deals done without the knowledge, or at least with him being a little bit on the sideline and actually the board pushing it through. So he's on very shaky ground.
Well, another man who is on shaky ground is Carlo Ancelotti, and with PSG still not managing a win, it remains to be seen whether he really deserves to be heading PSG. But we'll be discussing that when we get back from the break, and all the other teams in France as well. See you then. Hello and welcome back to the World Football Show. I'm Mina Rzouki and I'm joined by Andy Brassell and Raph Honigstein. On to France and of course Carlo Ancelotti and PSG, who are suffering a torrid time at the moment. 3 games, only 3 points collected. I guess it makes it a little bit better that Montpellier is not doing that great either.
Well, that doesn't really make any difference to them. But on the other hand, I'm not really sure if not doing that well in Ligue 1 makes any difference to them as well. Because if you go back to where Zlatan Ibrahimovic was presented to the press, it was Zlatan, Nassim El Khalifi, who's the president and representative of the owners, and Ancelotti. They sat there. They didn't talk about the league once. They talked about it's about building the brand. It's about building the brand of French football all across the world. It's about doing well in the Champions League. So they don't care about trophies
then?
Well, no, they care about the Champions League. That's the main thing, and that's the thing that's going to make them sexy to the world. I mean, Ligue 1's small beer, really. It is important to win it, and I think it's important to build a game that has style. And that's the problem, really, because they've not been beaten yet. Fair enough, they haven't won, but the football's been of such lamentable quality, and they've faced sides with different approaches. Like Bordeaux just came to the Parc des Princes to defend. When they went to Ajaccio tried to kick them off the park. When they played Lorient on the first day, they tried to play them on the counter-attack. They haven't really had answers to any of those.
But surely, if you can't win Ligue 1, then how can you even try to compete in the Champions League?
Well, I guess you assume those players will step up a level. And like I said, I think it's about the quality of the game. Whereas when it gets to the Champions League,
people won't be kicking them off the park, basically.
Yeah, and it will be more about results as well, because I think this is part of the sort of juxtaposition of Zlatan, really. They want a team that's going to seduce the Parc des Princes, seduce Paris, seduce France, seduce Europe and the world. But if you play with Ibrahimovic, it's not necessarily conducive to playing great football, because he's such a shortcut. You know what you can do. You can just sling the ball up there. And now they've got Verratti, who plays in front of the defence and can pass it accurately over 60 or 70 yards. It's the ultimate get-out.
They have 75 midfielders as well. So how are they going to rotate them all?
A lot of defensive ones as well, it has to be said. And it's almost as if Ancelotti's trying very hard to break from this mindset, because, of course, he took over PSG in quite an unenviable position, because they were 3 points clear at the top of the league.
And Comboiré wasn't doing such a bad job.
Exactly, and all he could do was lose the league from where he was. So he played very defensively, 4-3-2-1, and he got stuck from there. So now he's got to move towards this more aesthetically attractive game, again with another lot of new players. I think it's a very, very difficult thing to master. And it's getting to him, it's definitely getting to him, because we know Ancelotti, we know he's a sanguine type of guy. And normally he stands there observing in training under his little red cap, while his coaches, Makelele, Paul Clement, they do the shouting for him. But L'Equipe delighted in telling us the other day how Ancelotti was on the pitch shouting at people in Italian. And apparently he was getting so annoyed, even Verratti and Thiago Motta couldn't really understand what he was saying.
I mean, the interesting thing, and I think that's the big challenge for him, is, you look at his coaching career, and of course he hasn't been in that many clubs. He could really rely on a core of players who would do the job to a certain extent. He could tweak it, through substitutions, through tactics, but you had always 5, 6, maybe even more players at Milan who sort of ran the show, and you put them on the pitch and you know what you're going to get from them. And you had that effect, of course, that they would really turn it on in the Champions League, and then sometimes could just go through the motion a bit La Liga, and the same could be said of his Chelsea to a certain extent, even though he did, of course, win the league. Can he actually, though, do this kind of job, which is a very different job, which is really a job of taking all these disparate pieces and trying to somehow make them fit? And this is sort of already the second rebuild in as many years.
So basically,
and I'm not sure he can. I'm not sure he is that manager.
He's not someone who's keen on buying a lot of players, is he? He didn't do that really at Milan and Chelsea. As Raph said, he worked with an established core, even at Chelsea, and that suited him.
An established core of players that are really sort of intellectuals, and the likes of, Seedorf before, Andrea Pirlo, that's what he had in Milan.
Terry.
And then but still, Lampard.
Players who did the job.
Lampard, they kind of are football savvy, so they know what they're doing, and they don't necessarily need to be coached.
That's exactly the
point. Do you think it's the fact that he needs to be a proper coach at the moment, so a motivator, someone who makes them cohesive, is the problem? Or is he not a great tactician?
It's difficult. You don't want to be too harsh, but you just wonder, and you look at him and the way he carries himself. You wonder maybe they needed a younger, slightly hungrier,
or someone who understands the French league,
more energetic coach. I don't know. I think he is fantastic in taking a team that works and making them tick over. And he doesn't really give you huge sort of upswings necessarily, but he will never underperform. With this side, it's a sort of it's a startup. You know, it's a new company. It's a new team. You don't know what you're going to get. You have to start again. You have to get them somehow together. And I'm not sure he's the right guy for that.
But he replaced Comboiré, not because Comboiré is doing a terrible job, but he's the name to attract the players. A lot of these players wouldn't have come without him. And you can say, yeah, Leonardo's a sporting director, all the rest of it. They want to know, players want to know who the coach is. They want to know what plans the coach has.
It seems to me that basically this is someone who wants to...
the package is so interesting that you don't really care.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good word. I like that.
I mean,
so
a lot of players have signed the summer where there's actually no coach was in charge yet, and it didn't seem to stop them.
So they're basically like a man who just wants to go out with designer clothes and doesn't care whether or not it gets him women or anything like that. Because that's how it seems like. Because it's like they don't seem to care about winning any trophies or winning Liga or the fact that he might not be the right coach, because I'm not sure he really understands the French league so much.
No, I think he does care, because you don't want to be in charge of a team of superstars, at least in terms of the transfer fee that they've attracted, and not deliver. And you are going to get fired, and it's not a nice thing to be.
So you think there's a possibility
pressure.
he can get fired?
There definitely is.
is.
Well, Comboiré got sacked when he was 3 points clear at the top of the league.
But he's not a big name.
No, certainly. But on the other hand, there's only going to be a certain degree of patience. And we can say that they've not lost yet, that they're really aiming for the Champions League, but there is a limit. You can't have excuses when you've spent that much money, especially in a league like this.
139 million, huh? 75 midfielders.
And that's without the wages.
Okay, what about a team that is at the top of them at the moment, and one that's managed to get Joey Barton, Marseille? What do you think of them? Do you think they have a chance?
No, I
Very
don't.
Simply no.
Because they've got a very thin squad, and they've got a coach who knows what he's doing in Liga, in Elie Bolt. But I just think once they've got a couple of injuries, they'll run into trouble. I just don't really think the quality and the depth is really there. As for Barton, well, they're trying to bring the salary level down. They're doing a very similar project to what Lyon are trying to do, and get the big earners off the books after years of plenty. But I mean, Barton's a sort of player from a characteristic sort of perspective that Marseille fans should love. He's very passionate, I suppose. A
leader.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. But you think, technically, is he really that much better than what they've got? I'm not convinced the answer is yes. And also there's the fact he's got to purge that ban, and on top of that there's the fact that a lot of French people have not forgot what he did to Ousmane Dabo, who's a really well-liked guy.
And he is a PSG fan, from what I understand.
Joey Barton?
Apparently. Apparently he had come out a long time ago and said he used to support them against Liverpool.
It's a really puzzling move. I mean, you just wonder who woke up one day at Marseille and think, the player who we really, really need this season is Joey Barton.
Well, now Didier Deschamps has gone. Jose Inigo, the sporting director, is no one to have a row with.
Maybe that's
and Joey Barton is a one-size-fits-all approach in that sense.
There we go. That's perhaps all. That is actually all we have time for on today's shows. But make sure you tune in on Friday, Sunday and Monday for live Polish football. And of course, join us next week. Same time, same place, where we'll be discussing more football and hopefully with our great panellists yet again.